300 pounds of pure muscle, teeth, and aggression. And that was just the dogs. When the most feared mobster in Philadelphia walked his rabid Pitbulls into a late-night diner, everyone froze. But one exhausted, heavy-set waitress didn't run. She made one simple gesture, and the underworld stood still. It was 2:14 a.m. on a Tuesday, and the neon sign of Bellini's diner buzzed with a dying fluorescent hum, casting a sickly pink glow over the wet asphalt of Passyunk Avenue in South Philadelphia. Inside, Penelope Gallagher, penny to the 3 regulars who bothered to learn her name, was wiping down the laminate counter with a rag that smelled like bleached coffee and old grease. Penny was a big woman. She didn't use words like curvy or plus-sized to soften the reality. At 280 pounds, she was fat. She felt it in the agonizing swell of her ankles after a 12-hour shift, in the chafing of her thick thighs beneath the ugly polyester uniform, and in the way the diner's narrow aisles forced her to turn sideways to let customers pass. But being big had one distinct advantage in a gritty city like Philly. It made her invisible. Men didn't catcall her. Drunks didn't try to grab her waist when she poured their coffee. She was part of the furniture, a silent, unmovable fixture pouring black tar into porcelain mugs, until the bell above the glass door violently chimed, and the atmosphere in Bellini's snapped like a dry twig. The door was shoved open, letting in a gust of freezing rain and the terrifying sound of frantic claws scrambling against the checkered linoleum floor. 2 massive blue-nosed Pitbulls burst into the diner, their muscles rippling beneath sleek grey coats, thick silver choke chains digging into their necks. They were snarling, snapping at the air, practically dragging a massive bodyguard in a soaked trench coat. But it wasn't the dogs that made Sal, the diner's owner, drop a stack of ceramic plates in the kitchen. It was the man walking calmly behind them, Dominic Rossetti. He was the undisputed head of the local syndicate, a man whose name was whispered in the back rooms of illegal casinos and the morgues of the tri-state area. Dominic was terrifyingly handsome in a cold, statuesque way, sharp jawline, dark, dead eyes, and a tailored black suit that cost more than Penny's entire life savings. Rumor had it he had fed a union boss to those very dogs, King and Duke, just 3 months prior. The diner emptied out in seconds. The 2 truckers at the counter threw a $20 bill on the Formica and bolted out the side exit. Chloe, the skinny 20-something blonde waitress working the floor with Penny, took one look at the snarling Pitbulls, burst into tears, and locked herself in the women's restroom. "Corner booth," Dominic commanded, his voice a low, gravelly baritone that commanded absolute obedience. His bodyguard, a scarred brute named Frankie, dragged the lunging dogs toward the back of the diner. The dogs knocked over a chair, their heavy jowls snapping as they caught the scent of the fry cook's discarded bacon. "Sal!" Dominic barked, not even raising his voice, yet the sound carried over the rain. "I want 2 steaks, rare, for the boys, and a black coffee." Sal was cowering behind the grill. "Yes, Mr. Rossetti, right away." The problem was, someone had to serve him. Someone had to walk up to the corner booth, where 200-pound killing machines were currently pacing, straining against their chains, eyeing the room like a slaughterhouse. Penny stood by the coffee pots. Her lower back throbbed. She looked at the bathroom door where Chloe was hiding, then at Sal, who was trembling so hard he could barely flip the steaks on the griddle. Idiots, Penny thought. She wasn't brave. She was just exhausted. When you carry the weight of the world, and a significant amount of your own, every single day, fear starts to take a back seat to sheer, unadulterated fatigue. Penny sighed, a heavy heave of her broad chest, and picked up a fresh pot of steaming coffee. She grabbed a side plate, stacked it with a few thick cuts of raw bacon Sal hadn't cooked yet, and walked out from behind the counter. Her heavy, rubber-soled shoes squeaked against the wet linoleum. Thud. Squeak. Thud. Squeak. Dominic Rossetti looked up, his dark eyes locked onto her. He was used to waitresses who looked like Chloe, trembling, pretty, eager to please, and terrified. He was not used to a woman of Penny's sheer mass walking toward him, with the slow, deliberate momentum of a freight train, her face set in a mask of absolute apathy. "Don't come closer, sweetheart," Frankie the bodyguard warned, struggling to hold the leather leashes. "King's riled up tonight. He doesn't like strangers." As if on cue, the larger of the two Pitbulls, King, locked eyes with Penny. The dog let out a guttural, demonic growl from deep within its chest. It dug its claws into the floor, preparing to lunge at the massive target approaching their table. Penny didn't stop. She didn't hesitate. She knew dogs. Her grandfather, Arthur Gallagher, had been a K-9 handler for the Philadelphia Police Department for 30 years. He used to breed German shepherds, and he had taught Penny that a dog doesn't respect fear, and it doesn't respect running. It respects immovable energy. It respects a wall, and Penny was a wall. "I said stay back," Frankie yelled, his boots slipping on the wet floor as King suddenly lunged forward, jaws snapping wildly, inches from Penny's thick, apron-covered thigh. Dominic leaned forward, a flicker of genuine alarm crossing his usually impassive face. He expected the heavy-set woman to scream, to drop the coffee, to run crying like the rest of the world. He expected blood on the floor. Instead, Penny did something completely insane. She planted her feet wide. She didn't shrink. She expanded, pushing her broad shoulders back, making herself look as massive and unyielding as a mountain. With her right hand holding the coffee pot out of reach, she dropped her left hand flat, palm facing the floor, directly over the snapping dog's snout, not touching him, but hovering just an inch above his nose. It was an alpha block, a physical barrier of pure dominance. Then she clicked her tongue against the roof of her mouth. "Tisk! Tisk!" and let out a sharp, guttural hiss from her diaphragm. "Tsk! Sit!" It wasn't a request. It was a sound that vibrated with absolute, tired authority. King froze. The dog's amber eyes darted up to the hovering, steady palm, then to Penny's unblinking, exhausted brown eyes. She didn't smell like fear. She smelled like old grease, vanilla lotion, and absolute indifference. Before the dog could react, Penny smoothly used her hovering hand to retrieve a thick slice of raw bacon from the plate she held against her hip. She didn't toss it. She kept her palm flat, fingers tight together, and lowered it directly to the dog's mouth. "Take it gentle," she murmured, her voice suddenly dropping an octave, soothing but firm. King sniffed the meat. The aggression melted from his rigid posture. He gently closed his teeth around the bacon, pulling it from her palm without letting a single tooth scrape her skin. Seeing this Duke, the second Pitbull, immediately sat down on his haunches, whining softly, waiting for his turn. Penny repeated the gesture, offering him a piece of meat with a flat palm. Frankie's jaw hit the floor. The leather leashes went completely slack in his hands. Penny wiped her greasy palm on her apron, stepped forward, and began pouring the steaming black coffee into Dominic Rossetti's mug. "You want sugar? "Or are you sweet enough, Mr. Rossetti?" she asked casually, not making eye contact, just watching the dark liquid fill the cup. Dominic stared at her, utterly speechless. For the first time in perhaps a decade, the Mafia boss was thrown completely off balance. He looked at his prized, lethal dogs, currently sitting like well-behaved golden retrievers, staring up at the fat waitress with sheer adoration, and then back to her. They usually take off fingers," Dominic muttered, his voice losing its icy edge, replaced by raw fascination. Penny finished pouring and set the pot down. She looked him dead in the eye, unapologetic about her double chin or the sweat on her brow. "I've got enough padding to spare. Steaks will be out in a minute." She turned to walk away, but Dominic's hand suddenly shot out, lightly catching her thick wrist. His grip was strong, but not cruel. Penny froze, her heart doing a dangerous, terrifying flutter against her ribs. "What's your name?" he asked, his dark eyes scanning her face, not with disgust or mockery, but with an intense, burning curiosity. "Penny," she said, pulling her wrist away gently. "Penny," he repeated, tasting the name. "You're a brave woman, Penny. Or crazy." "Just tired, Mr. Rossetti. Just tired." She walked back to the counter, feeling the heavy gaze of the city's most dangerous man burning a hole in her back. For the next 20 minutes, Dominic didn't look at his phone. He didn't speak to Frankie. He just drank his coffee and watched the heavy-set waitress clean tables, his mind racing. She defied every expectation. She didn't cower. She didn't try to make herself small. She owned the space she occupied, but the quiet intrigue was about to be violently shattered. Dominic's presence in South Philly tonight wasn't a secret. He had recently muscled the Gallo brothers out of the shipping docks, and retribution in their world was swift and loud. Penny had just returned to the counter with Sal's plate of rare steaks when she heard it. The distinct, high-pitched screech of tires outside. She turned her head just in time to see a black, mud-splattered SUV jump the curb outside Bellini's. The tinted windows rolled down, revealing the cold, black steel of automatic weapons protruding into the rainy night. Time seemed to slow down. Penny didn't think about her own safety. She didn't think about diving behind the thick metal counter. Her eyes darted to the corner booth. Dominic had his back to the window. "Get down!" Penny roared, her voice booming through the diner. The glass storefront exploded inwards in a deafening shower of shattered safety glass and flying bullets. The sound of automatic gunfire ripped through the diner, tearing into the vinyl booths, exploding ketchup bottles and shredding the air. Dominic dove sideways, but the heavy table pinned him. Frankie reached for his weapon, but took a graze to the arm, falling backward. The dogs panicked. King and Duke, terrified by the deafening noise, scrambled wildly, their leashes tangling around the table legs, trapping them directly in the line of fire. Without a second thought, Penny moved. Her massive frame, usually a burden, became a weapon of pure momentum. She threw herself across the open aisle, diving straight into the storm of bullets and glass. She didn't reach for Dominic. She reached for the dogs. Penny tackled the two panicked Pitbulls, using her 280 pounds to force them flat onto the linoleum floor beneath the overhang of the booth. She wrapped her thick arms around their necks, pulling them close to her chest, shielding their bodies with her own massive back. A bullet grazed the wooden trim inches from her ear. Shards of broken glass rained down on her broad back like biting insects, slicing through her polyester uniform. She held tight. pressing her face into the dog's fur, humming a loud, frantic vibration against their necks to keep them grounded, just as her grandfather had taught her. And then, as quickly as it started, the gunfire ceased. Tires screeched as the SUV sped away into the rainy night. The diner was dead silent, save for the hiss of the espresso machine and the sound of falling glass. Dominic Rossetti pushed the shattered table off his legs. He was bleeding from a deep gash on his temple, his tailored suit covered in plaster and glass. He looked frantically around the ruined diner, his heart pounding in his chest. "King? Duke?" he choked out. From beneath the debris, a slow, heavy groan echoed. Dominic scrambled around the booth. There, on the floor, covered in broken glass and dust, was Penny. Her uniform was torn, blood seeping through the back of her shirt in half a dozen places. But firmly beneath her, completely unharmed and trembling, were his 2 dogs. Penny slowly lifted her head, wincing in agony, still gripping the heavy leather collars. She looked up at the Mafia boss, her face pale, a streak of dirt and blood across her cheek. "They're okay," Penny rasped, her chest heaving. "The dogs are okay." Dominic Rossetti dropped to his knees in the broken glass. He didn't look at the ruin of the diner. He didn't care about the hitmen who had just tried to end his life. He stared at the heavy-set, bleeding waitress who had just used her own body to shield the only things in the world he actually loved. In that blood-soaked moment, among the shattered glass and neon hum of Bellini's diner, the ruthless Mafia boss looked at the fat, invisible waitress and realized he was staring at a queen. The wail of police sirens pierced the heavy Philadelphia rain. Inside the ruined shell of Bellini's diner, the air was thick with cordite and drywall dust. Dominic Rossetti didn't flinch at the approaching sirens. His dark eyes remained fiercely locked on Penny. She was gasping for air, her broad back covered in lacerations, her uniform soaked tight against her thick rolls in a terrifying mix of blood and rainwater. Beneath her massive frame, King and Duke trembled but were completely unscathed. "Frankie!" Dominic roared. "Get the armored Lincoln to the back door, now!" Frankie, clutching a superficial graze on his arm, hesitated. "Boss, the cops are 2 minutes out. We have to leave her." Dominic pulled his custom 1911 pistol, pressing the hot barrel directly against the center of Frankie's forehead. "Bring the car, or you die bleeding on this floor." Frankie swallowed hard and scrambled out the back exit. "Don't move," Dominic commanded Penny, his tone dropping to a soothing register as he draped his ruined suit jacket over her massive back. "I'm fine," Penny wheezed. "I've got thick skin. The glass didn't go deep." "You took a bullet graze to the shoulder," Dominic said, looking at her hot, with the disdain society usually offered a 280-pound woman, but with profound awe. 2 heavily armed enforcers rushed in. Dominic ordered them to help lift Penny. It took 3 large men to properly hoist her heavy frame, but Dominic took the lion's share of her weight, securely wrapping his arms around her thick waist, ignoring the blood staining his custom Italian shirt. They loaded her into the sprawling back seat of a bulletproof Navigator. The dogs flatly refused to be separated from her, curling their muscular bodies protectively around her thick legs. They didn't go to a public hospital. The Rossetti family employed a private trauma surgeon, Dr. Harrison Caldwell, who patched up mobsters entirely off the books. When Penny finally slipped into unconsciousness from the searing pain, the absolute last thing she felt was Dominic's large, warm hand tightly gripping her grease-stained fingers. She woke up to the smell of sterile alcohol and expensive lavender. The diner's harsh fluorescent lights were replaced by the warm glow of a brass bedside lamp. She was lying in a king-sized bed, the silk sheets impossibly soft against her skin. A spike of panic seized her chest as she tried to sit up, feeling the tight pull of dozens of fresh stitches across her broad back. "Easy, tisk, stay." The command, echoing her own earlier tone, came in a low baritone. Dominic sat in a tufted leather armchair beside the bed, exhausted. King rested his blocky head gently on Penny's thick ankle, while Duke slept on the Persian rug. "Where am I?" Penny asked, realizing she was wearing a delicate black silk nightgown that surprisingly fit her heavy frame perfectly. "My estate in Bucks County," Dominic said, leaning heavily on his knees. "Dr. Caldwell pulled glass out of your back for 3 hours. You have 42 stitches." Penny felt incredibly vulnerable. She was just a fat, invisible waitress from South Philly. She instinctively grabbed the luxurious down comforter, pulling it up to her chin to hide her stomach, to hide the sheer, unapologetic size of her body. Dominic's sharp jaw tightened. He walked slowly to the edge of the bed and gently reached out. With immense reverence, he pulled the comforter back down to her waist. "Don't hide from me," Dominic whispered, his dark eyes burning. "I spent my whole life surrounded by thin, fragile people who run when the bullets start flying." He traced the line of her jaw, his thumb brushing over her soft, full cheek. "You didn't run, Penny. You stood like a stone wall. You threw your own heavy body over my dogs to save their lives. No one has ever protected what is mine." Penny swallowed hard. "They're just dogs, Dominic." They were scared. "They are my family," he corrected fiercely. "And now, so are you." Before Penny could process the staggering weight of those words, a sharp knock echoed at the door. Dominic's tender expression vanished, replaced by the cold eyes of a cartel killer. "Come in," he barked. Frankie stepped inside, his bandaged arm held stiffly. He carried a small metal tray with a medical syringe and a vial of clear liquid. "Boss, Dr. Caldwell stepped out to his car. He told me to give her this painkiller." Dominic nodded. "Do it, then guard the hallway. I have to make a secure phone call to arrange a retaliation strike." Dominic squeezed Penny's hand one last time and left the room, leaving the heavy door slightly ajar. Frankie approached the bed. Penny had spent 10 years reading people in a diner. Frankie was sweating profusely. His pupils were blown wide with adrenaline, and the dogs knew it. King suddenly stood up, the short grey fur along his thick spine bristling. A rumbling growl started in his throat. Duke stood up from the rug, baring his white teeth at the bodyguard. "Quiet, mutts," Frankie hissed venomously. He pulled the orange cap off the syringe. He didn't draw medicine. Instead, he pulled the plunger back in the open air, filling the plastic barrel with a massive, lethal pocket of empty air, an untraceable air embolism. "Frankie," Penny said softly, her pulse pounding violently. "What are you doing?" "Cleaning up a giant mess," Frankie whispered maliciously. "You shouldn't have yelled, 'Get down, fatty.' The gallows paid me 50 grand to text them when the boss was trapped. You're a massive loose end." He lunged forward with terrifying speed, aiming the deadly needle straight for the IV port taped to her hand. Frankie made one fatal miscalculation. He thought a 280-pound woman recovering from injuries would be a slow, helpless victim. He thought she was just a fat waitress. He didn't realize that mass, when weaponized, is an unstoppable force. Instead of pulling her arm away, Penny threw her entire weight forward. She drove her thick, powerful right shoulder directly into Frankie's chest. The sheer, unexpected force of her 280 pounds slamming into him was like being hit by a compact car. Frankie gasped, all the air leaving his lungs in a violent rush, and he stumbled backward. The syringe flew out of his hand, clattering harmlessly onto the hardwood floor. "Tisk! Get him!" Penny roared, pointing a thick finger directly at the bodyguard. The dogs didn't hesitate. King launched himself from the mattress, 100 pounds of muscle and teeth flying through the air. He clamped his powerful jaws directly onto Frankie's right forearm, the one reaching for his holstered gun. Frankie screamed in agony, crashing to the floor. Duke was right behind him, pinning Frankie's legs down, snarling violently, teeth inches from the traitor's throat. Penny didn't wait in bed. Pushing through the searing pain in her stitched back, she threw off the silk sheets and stood up. She walked over to where Frankie was screaming and writhing on the floor beneath the dogs. She picked up a heavy, solid brass lamp from the bedside table and stepped firmly onto Frankie's gun hand with her thick heel, pinning it to the floor. The door burst open. Dominic rushed in, his 1911 pistol drawn, his eyes wild with panic. He stopped dead in his tracks. He expected to see Penny bleeding. Instead, he saw his 2 lethal Pitbulls holding a screaming Frankie to the floor, while the heavy-set waitress stood over him, her foot crushing his wrist, a brass lamp raised in her hand, breathing heavily, but looking absolutely victorious. "He's the rat," Penny said, her voice completely steady, despite the adrenaline coursing through her veins. "He texted the gallows. He just tried to inject an air bubble into my IV." Dominic's face went deadly pale, then flushed with a terrifying, demonic rage. He looked at the empty syringe on the floor, then at the terrified bodyguard. "Boss, please," Frankie sobbed, trying to shake King off his arm. "She's lying. The fat bitch is lying." Dominic didn't say a word. He walked slowly across the room. He reached down, grabbed King by the collar, and gently pulled the dog back. "Good boy," he whispered to the dog. He signaled Duke to back off. Dominic looked up at Penny. He looked at her bare, thick legs, her broad, heaving chest, the fire in her eyes. He had never seen anything so incredibly beautiful in his entire life. "Step back, my queen," Dominic said softly. Penny lowered the lamp and stepped back, her bare feet silent on the rug. Dominic raised his pistol and fired 2 suppressed rounds directly into Frankie's chest. The bodyguard gasped once and went completely still. The room fell silent, save for the heavy breathing of the dogs and the rain lashing against the mansion's windows. Dominic holstered his weapon. He didn't call for a cleanup crew right away. Instead, he closed the distance between himself and Penny. He wrapped his strong arms around her thick waist, pulling her massive, warm body flush against his. Penny gasped, her hands instinctively coming up to rest on his broad chest. "I've spent my whole life trusting the wrong people," Dominic whispered, his forehead resting against hers. "I hired men with muscles and guns, and they sold me out for a paycheck. And then I walked into a diner, and a woman who has been overlooked her entire life stepped in front of bullets for me. I did it for the dogs." Penny deflected, a blush rising to her cheeks. Dominic smiled, a genuine, blindingly handsome smile that transformed his ruthless face. "I know, and that's exactly why I'm keeping you." He leaned in and kissed her. It wasn't a tentative, careful kiss. It was a claiming. He kissed her with a fierce, burning hunger, his hands roaming over the wide flare of her hips, gripping her thick thighs with absolute reverence. He didn't treat her like she was fragile. He treated her like she was a goddess carved from stone. Penny kissed him back, pouring years of loneliness, exhaustion, and hidden strength into the embrace. For the first time in her life, Penny Gallagher wasn't invisible. She was the center of the universe. Within 6 months, the underworld of Philadelphia had changed completely. The Gallo brothers were buried beneath a new shipping warehouse, and Dominic Rossetti ruled the syndicate with absolute, ironclad control. But everyone in the city knew who the real power behind the throne was. When Dominic walked into Bellini's diner now, he wasn't just flanked by 2 massive Pitbulls. He was holding the hand of a woman who commanded the room the second she stepped inside. Penny never lost a pound, and she never tried to. She wore tailored, dark velvet dresses that accentuated her massive curves, dripping in diamonds that Dominic bought for her weekly. No one mocked her. No one looked away. Because everyone knew the truth. You could cross Dominic Rossetti and beg for a quick death. But if you disrespected his wife, if you even looked at Penny the wrong way, she wouldn't need her husband to handle you. She would just click her tongue against the roof of her mouth, and the hounds of hell would be unleashed. Nobody could tame the Mafia boss's Pitbulls. But the Queen didn't tame them. She just reminded them who the real alpha was. Did this story of pure power, loyalty, and unlikely romance keep you on the edge of your seat? True strength comes in all shapes and sizes, and Penny proved that being a wall is better than being fragile. If you loved this twist-filled Mafia drama, please hit that like button, share this video with your fellow romance lovers, and subscribe to our channel for more incredible, gripping stories every single week. What would you do in Penny's shoes? Let us know below.